merciful aliens brought a swift end to civilization. The sidewalks disappeared or were eaten. The aliens, viewing all this, decided to replace civilization with a completely accurate model of civilization using only carrot sticks. Civilization was then called into question as carrot stick people created carrot stick atom bombs to destroy other carrot stick people. They looked for ways to start fights with one another and steal one another's oil. And seeing this, the merciful aliens decided to wipe it all out again. And this time in recreating civilization, they used nothing but hammocks. Hammocks being inanimate seemed a much more logical choice, for they did not create anything. They just stood there. The hammock people did not look even at the other hammock people, much less look at them wrong or start fights with the other hammock people. The hammock oil stayed in the ground where it belonged. Nobody tried to drill for it at all. And the hammock society was successful and thrived and did nothing. The Welcome Back Kotter theme song pooped wildly into the air. The benevolent aliens were duly impressed by this feat. They produced a chainsaw and began hacking up their hammock society. Although it functioned well, they began to think about now sculpting a society out of piss. But then they realized a society made out of piss was exactly what they had started out with, and they abandoned the idea and decided to make Pop-Tarts instead. Pop-Tarts, of course, are made from air, violence, 24 grams of saturated fat, teeth, more air, more teeth, and 17 promises from the book of Job that never ever came true. The teeth and air were fashioned from rope. The rope was made of dirt. The dirt was made from air. The air in turn made from rope, and the rope made from dirt, the dirt made from air, etc. The benevolent aliens ate their Pop-Tarts that they had created. Then they sat to ponder what they should do next about human civilization. They determined that they would put it back the way it was originally, with people fucking everything up, ruining the world. After all, they put it there in the first place. The humans, so gleeful to be back in their original realm, started to destroy everything, and it didn't take long before the planet was gone. They were so thrilled with their achievement that they wrote letters home to Mom to explain what it was that they had done. Everybody was so happy. The planet had disappeared. Floating in space, the humans wondered what to do next. Could they get to the moon and ruin that too? It was certainly worth a try, and they weren't about to stop now. Dry olive oil was the name of the man who was first to penetrate into the core of the sun, finding a hospitable environment in which to live. Actually, on the inside of the sun, there's vast mountains of ice cream, and the animal life found there is equally tasty. Glue guns were the currency for the natives of Sun's interior, which the natives were not discovered for the first several years that dry olive oil lived there. He had to travel to the other side of the mountain of ice cream, where a city resided full of what I guess you could call people, although they looked more like bullion cubes than people. But they spoke fluently, of course in a language that dry olive oil couldn't understand. Eventually, they came to an understanding, and through glue gun trade, established an economic interdependency between the two. For dried olive oil was certainly their only source of Van Halen albums, and maybe more importantly, had a monopoly on tick farming within the sun's interior. Dry olive oil got lonely. Although the natives were there, he longed for one of his own kind. So he purchased a mail-order bride by the name of Beast Cataracts. She arrived on the 20th of December and quickly began to have babies within the week. Beast Cataracts and dry olive oil populated with humans, the sun's center. So they were sort of like the new Adam and Eve, unless you count the natives there, which of course, since they were humans, they didn't. Humanus Solaris was an agrarian society and terribly inbred, just like the original humans, if you believe the Bible's tall tale, that is. So, because of the inbreeding, they were terribly stupid. Too stupid to even start any wars. Not even with the likes of bullion cubes on the other side of the mountain. The crops that were raised by the Humanus Solaris included macrame owls, Pez dispensers, licorice twists. The crops grown there were exported to all corners of the known universe, and their farming skills became renowned and envied by people such as the bullion cube. About 35 trillion years after the society first became established, one of those assholes got the harebrained idea of heading back to Earth, check it out and see what was going on there. This particular person, Carvagina Extracted, was married to a bullion cube, which had become a pretty common practice by this point in time. Unfortunately, the Humanus Solaris and bullion cubes could not breed, because it would have been pretty cool to see how fucked up one of those things would have turned out. Anyway, Carvagina Extracted and his bullion cube wife decided to sculpt a spaceship that could make the travel from the center of the sun to Earth in a reasonable amount of time. Humanus Solaris had evolved to the point where a lifespan of 600 or 700 years was not uncommon. Bullion cubes were well known to survive beyond 2,500 years. So the journey really needed to take place in a couple hundred years to be on the safe side, as Carvagina Extracted was already 300 years old by this point in time. Carvagina Extracted's wife was named Sizzling Overload. The spaceship that they built was made from globs of pudding stitched together with thread that was made of air and dust particles. The fuel used to propel the ship was helium-based and smelled like an old baseball mitt that got left on a gravestone for a week or two. The maiden voyage of the spaceship back to Earth was on Tuesday, and as planned, it took 187 years to make it to Earth, during which time Carvagina Extracted conducted experimentation on the possibility of artificially inseminating the bullion cube with a mixture of Elmer's glue and thumbtacks. It came close to working 40 or 50 times, but in the end, No results were noted. Upon the return to Earth, the explorers, of course, found no sign of life. Most of the buildings still stood in various states of decay, and the two imagined that this Earth of theirs, they took ownership of it, finders keepers, This Earth of theirs could be a new home, and they looked at a vast number of structures as kind of like a playground for them. Many of the products that had once been produced on Earth still stood on store shelves, unscathed by the demise of the demise of all life. Such things as Twinkies and cans of okra, skillets, quesadilla makers, garbage bags. Products like these were pretty much in the same state that they had been trillions of years earlier. The two explorers didn't really know what to make of most of it. Food items were largely unidentifiable as such. So they would kind of tend to try to eat things that really weren't food, and they noticed that in a lot of cases, they ate a spatula, for example. It tasted pretty much better than the things that had been considered food items originally on Earth, like the Twinkies. Eventually they took up residence in an abandoned Wal-Mart store and began drinking the motor oil off the shelves for nutrition. They also found it a lot of fun to play with rubber bands day and night, or turn on one of the old TV sets and just look at the static. They never did figure out to put in a DVD or something like that to watch, or for God's sake a CD to listen to music. But they were at Walmart anyway, so if they'd stuck in a DVD or a CD, it would have been bullshit anyhow. They lived this way for about 30 years, and eventually, of course, grew pretty bored of the whole goddamn thing. So they packed up their spaceship again, filled it with fuel, and took off for the sun. But somewhere along the way, they saw a sign and took a left when they should have taken a right, and ended up at a different planet altogether. You want to talk about getting lost? These two were hopelessly lost. They didn't even stay in the right solar system, and ended up on the other side of the universe, finding a new planet that they called Soup in a Cup, something that they had seen at Walmart that really stuck with them for one reason or another. The real name of the planet was Teeth in a Cup, but they had no way of knowing that. Soup in a Cup, or Teeth in a Cup, was quite a different kind of planet. Again, it was a planet that had once been inhabited, apparently, by all the unnatural structures that occurred throughout the landscape. But the structures were quite different from what was encountered on Earth. Most of them seemed to be built in the shape of a human nose. There was reason, of course, to suspect that somehow the shape of these structures meant something different than the nose of a human being, because after all, why would people who lived on this planet know anything about human beings to begin with? On the other hand, there was an intriguing possibility that some of the human beings who left Earth maybe ended up settling on this planet, and that could be a potential explanation for not only the structures that look like human noses, but also the fact that civilization seemed to be wiped out, and humans are, of course, well known to be really good at that. So again, they moved into one of the existing structures rather than building their own. At first it was kind of weird living inside what, resembled a human nose. but they got used to it in time, and the nostrils proved to be pretty cozy, comfortable lifestyle to be had. Finding food sources was tough at first until they began to realize that chewing and swallowing the air on this planet was all the nutrition that they actually needed. If these two had been parents, they most likely would have said to their children, "Sit down and eat your air." The downside of having food everywhere, since the air was food, was that both of them got pretty goddamn fat pretty fast. Although it's hard to tell when a bouillon cube is overweight. Eventually they decided that they might stay on cup of soup or cup of teeth permanently, but it was lonely, so they started posting rental notices throughout the universe in the hopes that somebody else from some planet or another would move into one of the noses nearby and, just to have some neighbors around. Eventually some people did move to cup of soup / cup of teeth, and they came from places like hair weevil, scooped up barf in an Ed Asner commemorative beer stein, airbrushed nostril in outer space, tit, coagulated barf demons, bunched up grand burglars, squid delight. With so many new people living there, they had a grand reopening celebration. Everybody in the universe was invited. It was pretty crowded that night, and they should have invited some of the people from the unknown universe. Why do the people in the unknown universe always get ignored? At the party, another transplanted human, no disappearing vomit, got so drunk off of turpentine and wax sealant that he declared the universe his. Again, not an uncommon move for humans, but this time it pissed the wrong people off, and a war was declared in the name of ownership of the universe. Now, naturally, with so many people liable to stake claim for ownership, it became quite a huge conflict. Though it seems like mostly human beings were the ones willing to stake such a ridiculous claim. Other beings generally wouldn't make such an absurd claim, but humans, always willing to one-up one another on stupidity for stupidity's sake, ran around all claiming that they own the goddamn thing. The war raged for 67 trillion years, but it was a different kind of a war because most of the humans staking claim to ownership of the universe, they didn't live like next door to each other or even across the ocean. They were across millions and millions of miles of space from one another. So this war was generally fought by writing each other nasty letters and hurling insults about. The agreement was that the most insulting letter would decide the ownership of the universe for the letter writer, decision going towards the letter writer. But who to judge? Well, unfortunately, at the time, God was away on vacation, so for these 67 trillion years, that is. So they had to find somebody else to judge, and who would be impartial about such a thing. Well, as it turned out, there was a particular planet of beings that could be impartial about anything, including ownership of the universe, which of course included their planet. These beings gave themselves no name. Their appearance was something along the lines of potato peelings, but not dirty, after they've been scrubbed and most of the eyes had been taken out and then peeled. Some people take the eyes out of the potato before they peel it for some reason or another, and that's kind of what these beings resembled. In the end, the letter that was the winning entry into the war was written by Hugh Henry Chuckwagon, who lived on a planet west of amphibian tropic underpants menagerie tit vehicle ball. Dear Sirs, the letter read, Marmalade has attacked me, and I resent it thoroughly. I am about to put postage stamps on your butt. If you do not find this offensive, then you are not worthy of my consideration. My teeth are bigger than the White House, and whiter. They harm you in many significant ways. Stick that in your pipe and blow it, you rotten piece of filthy garbage. Sincerely, with all my love, Hugh Henry Chuckwagon. This entry was judged the most insulting, although in the years after the judgment was handed down, it's commonly become accepted that a more insulting letter was actually written by a man known as the Huguenot Mystery. And in his letter he wrote, Dear friend, asparagus booby, love the Huguenot Mystery. But at any rate, the war was over at this point. How this affected the universe, not many beings paid much attention to the ownership. They didn't change the way they lived because oversight was non-existent. There's no way for him to monitor all of his property at this point. So it's kind of like if during this time, if there's a person with no legs or any other means of transportation available to them, and say they owned property halfway around the world, what would they be able to do about anything that was going on their property? Nothing. So basically nothing much changed in the universe except for on this fucker's home planet where everything got all fucked up. He was your typical kind of despot, taking whatever the fuck he felt like taking from whoever he wanted to take it from. All the resources were his to play with as he felt. All the females were his to play with as he felt. All the money was his to do with what he wished. And the people of the planet got pissed. Some left, which they had to do illegally, and the ones who remained did what any good humans would do, started another goddamn war. The war on his home planet didn't impact the rest of the universe, though, because like I said, they just elsewhere in the universe ignored the guy and his claim to ownership of the universe. But on this planet, the war was a more conventional type. It didn't happen by letters this time. Instead, they played lots of hopscotch to decide the victor. The hopscotch grids at this point had evolved to be far more complex than they were in, say, the 20th and 21st centuries. One of the spots would be a picture of Ed Asner or something like that. Wars are easiest to follow when there's two clear sides to the conflict, but this wasn't the case in this war. There were at least 32 different factions all fighting with one another, which made the shit ultra confusing. The vegetarians were embattled against the foot fetishists, while the foot fetishists couldn't care less about the vegetarians, but were really pissed off at the nose cancer survivors, who in turn were battling fiercely against Todd Rundgren fans. With this war raging between 32 or more factions, the mucus production of the planet increased by a factor of 53, began to fly out as the planet spun, fly across the universe and stick to another planet. All this snot flying off this planet, lapping around, sticking to other planets and shit. Well, people from other parts of the universe started to take notice and weren't happy. So other planets got involved in trying to negotiate the peace. But they quickly found out that it was pretty much useless. These bunch of assholes could never seem to get along no matter what happened. So all the planets that kept getting snot on them started to devise a plot to blow the shit out of this planet and just fucking get rid of it once and for all. After you get snot on you a few dozen times, you start to feel that way after a while. And believe me, that's a lot of snot that has to be flying around because, you know, what are the chances that anything is going to hit a planet in the universe? Most of the universe is just open space. So you got like a very, very slim probability of ever being hit. And if you've gotten hit a dozen times already, I mean, that's a shitload of snot flying around then. The planet by now started to become known as Mucous Q Mucous by the rest of the universe, replacing its old name for obvious reasons. Once the plot to blow up Mucous Q Mucous had been formulated, the 18 planets that had been instrumental in the draft of this resolution took it before the governing body of the universe, which was called Pickle Charged Diaper Rash, residing in a nebula out past New Jersey somewhere. The governing body quickly rejected the proposal. Obviously, it was thought to be cruel and unusual. Not everybody on the planet was a complete asshole. The warring factions constituted about 80% of the population of the planet, but the other 20% was more or less innocent of any wrongdoing or significant wrongdoing at the very least. So the governing body felt like this was just an unsuitable plan and set about to devise an alternative with representatives of the 18 planets. What they eventually decided upon was to take small filaments no wider than a human hair and tie them to any kind of anchor-like thing on this planet, on Mucous Q Mucous, like rocks that were in the ground, filaments tied to trees, mountains, tie them to people who didn't move around very much, anything stationary basically. Homes, bricks, salads, if they were placed on a table pretty securely, etc. And once all these filaments had been secured, somewhere around 600, 700 quadrillion of them, then they would be able to manually stop the rotation of the planet. Trick of it was to somehow get the people who weren't the assholes, who weren't in the war, to migrate to one side of the planet and leave all the other 80%, the ones in the war, on the other side of the planet to freeze to death once they halted the rotation of the planet. So they'd stop the rotation of this planet while the people who were the innocents were facing the star, and while the people who were guilty of this war were facing away from the star. Let them, over time, starve to death because nothing would grow. Again, the real problem being, how do you keep them there? All of a sudden your planet stopped rotating. Of course, you're going to start running to the side with a starlight on it, away from the dark side of the planet. But they had to think of some way to prevent this from happening. It took a young scientist named Rodriguez Beethoven to finally figure out a way to keep him there. And the answer was just showing Andy Griffith reruns on just the dark side of the planet. With, of course, dropping the hint to the innocence of the planet that it was a trap. So that's what they did. They started showing Andy Griffith reruns, and the assholes in the war stayed over on the dark side of the planet while the innocents knew better and stuck on the lighted side. They enjoyed their TV viewing, those people, but they did eventually starve to death with nothing growing over there. And thus the war was resolved. All the filaments were cut. Planet started rotating again as usual. Mucus production back to normal. Everything more or less set right in the universe. I'd say everything was more or less set right, because nothing can ever be right where humans are concerned. You get this inner drive to see if they can screw up their own lives. Everybody's got it. You don't even realize you're doing it. What kind of thing can I do to make my life more difficult? It's a subconscious thing that's going on, but if you could voice what it is that you really do on a day-to-day basis, that's it. Okay, nobody knows that it's going on, but you keep doing it anyway. Otherwise, wouldn't it make sense to, simplify, make things simpler on yourself? Nobody can do that. That's the human condition. It's like, fuck myself up. That's what I want to do. And a lot of human fuck yourself ups are just that. You fuck yourself up. But, it may not impact a whole hell of a lot of other people around you. At this point, after this war was quelled, the next considerable fuck yourself up that a human pulled that really radiated out from them was the effort of Petoskey-Vomitoskey. Petoskey-Vomitoskey's problem began when he decided to resurface his driveway. Again, a matter of making your life complicated where it doesn't need to be. His driveway wasn't in really all that bad of condition. There were a couple of cracks, sure, but he could have avoided resurfacing that thing for a good while, maybe 3, 4, 5 years. But instead of taking the easy way, he decided to complicate his life and take on the project anyway. And that started all his difficulties. And as I said, not just difficulties for himself, but this was the next great human problem throughout the universe. So the shit sprayed when it hit the fan. The material he used to resurface his driveway was a toxic kind of mixture. as is pretty usual. But in this particular mixture, which was a specialty of a company called Evil Surfaces Enterprises United Paving, included as one of the ingredients for no good reason whatsoever except to be bastards. They included phenol, or Petoskey Vomitoski overdid it as far as resurfacing was concerned. He went over that surface like 85 times for God knows what reason. Probably an OCD. And so much of that phenol was released into the atmosphere. The inhabitants of the planet were all walking around in a permanent stupor. It really kind of resembled Earth from the 20th and 21st century, where people wandered around in a stupor of shopping and watching sporting events and going to the movies and buying Britney Spears albums. But here it was a little bit more serious, because this planet was the location of the governing body that vetoed the plan to blow up that one planet. So now all of a sudden the governing body of the universe was in a permanent stupor and couldn't govern correctly. Thus there were repercussions throughout the universe. With the governing body essentially asleep, the humans throughout the universe saw their chance to act up. They knew that there were no longer any repercussions for whatever kind of idiotic behavior they decided to pull. So, throughout the universe, wherever humans were to be found, which was now almost everywhere, these jackasses started to wreak havoc, just like their DNA had always conditioned them to do. It had been a really long time since anybody had made a nuclear bomb, and they'd read all about it and they were itching to get back to it. Sounded like so much fun. A bomb that could cause that much destruction. How could you go wrong? They'd heard about Nagasaki and Hiroshima and all the other times that nuclear weapons had been used, and they thought it sounded just swell. So many nuclear projects started springing up at this point. Long-range missiles that could travel between galaxies started to be built. They didn't know what they wanted to use them for, but they knew they had to be good for something. The way that they propelled rockets between galaxies, that was the real trick of it. It was Hamburger Propulsion systems that came up with the secret formula, ground chuck. Ground chuck was more explosive and powerful and deadly than any other fuel. The more fat, the better. The development of the bombs and the propulsion system really didn't take all that long, a couple hundred years to develop. And once it was developed, they really had to start thinking about how to use it. I mean, why have it if you don't use it? Those old days of just having it as a deterrent, those are long gone, and they built them to use them. They just had to figure out where to point them. One of the neatest things that some humans could think of to do with their new toys was to blow up stars. Just fuck with the gravity of the universe. Seemed like a really fun thing to do. Just see what happens, just again, like Nagasaki and Hiroshima, just to see what would happen. The first planet to do so was Shasta Crinkle, and they didn't want to blow up their own star, obviously. So they blew one up that was 3,000 or 4,000 light years away. So the star that they blew up didn't have any life-sustaining planets in orbit around. The short-sighted beings from throughout the galaxy at first kind of regarded it as a really neato experiment, but of course they came to understand that it made a difference anyhow, because gravity was all messed up, and because of the shift in gravity, these other stars started bouncing into each other. They were like run into each other and bounce off and go the other direction. There's some pretty sound science in all of this. The other stars in the vicinity started just ramming each other like one of those demolition derbies at the county fair. It had big dents in the stars. Instead of looking around, they were all oblong and shit. Looked all nasty. It spread. It started to spread, this freak occurrence. I guess that one star that was blown up was kind of like the anchor to all the stars in the whole universe, and once it was gone, it was just like everything was a mess. It kind of figures that this would pretty much destroy the universe. All these stars flying around, bumping into each other and stuff like that. How could planets survive such an ordeal? But they moved in a pretty predictable pattern, and it was clear the predictions were written as to the paths of the various stars. And that same Hamburger propulsion system that had been used to blow up that star in the first place was now hooked up to all the life-sustaining planets, and they were actually able to change their orbits to coincide with the movement of the stars, and programmed it all into massive computers to constantly be correcting for the movement, so that although they were constantly shifting orbits, it was undetectable on the ground. The main difference was that there were like vast land masses that were no longer usable, because this is where the rockets for the propulsion system had been attached. So that was about all there was to it. I mean, they had to tear down a few Wal-Marts or whatever to accommodate that, but not a big deal really when you got right down to it. So the era of moving stars and changing orbits had started when stars migrated really far, which started to happen. Then you get like when they're bouncing into each other, there would be like intersecting orbits of planets, inhabited planets. So sometimes they'd be passing by each other close enough so that people could give each other high fives as they went by. And it was pretty cool if you timed it right. As the two planets were passing by each other, you could just step off of one planet onto the other one that was going by. a few trillion years into this new era of the moving stars, several stars had grouped themselves together so that 4 or 5 inhabited planets were orbiting a cluster of stars, and with the near orbits that were close to one another. So these 4 or 5 planets formed sort of an alliance. It was the first time in history that more than 2 planets had been clustered in one group, more than 2 inhabited planets. So these neighbors could, when the time was right, hop from one planet to the next. And even when they weren't, when it wasn't possible to do that, travel from one planet to another was pretty short and simple to do, especially with the Hamburger propulsion system. Now they miniaturized the system to where it was possible to install one on a kind of like a jet pack, a backpack sort of thing. So like a personal propulsion system. You fix yourself up with a spacesuit, breathing apparatus, and you could individually jet from one planet to the next anytime you felt like it. The evolution had acclimated these humans and other beings to being able to withstand great G-forces. The planets had to be rerouted and shifted in their orbits so often that it was well tolerated by this point. The little kids on the planets found fun things to do as the planets passed nearby one another. They could TP each other's houses and egg each other's houses, and it was pretty hard to catch them unless you were ready with your backpack on to jet after them, because it went by pretty quick. The planets were usually traveling in excess of 32 miles an hour. So by the time you got your house TP'd or egged, it was too late. Then the greatest band in the history of the universe was formed at this time. It was thanks entirely to the fact that these 5 planets were all in orbit so close by. 7 people who most certainly would not have ever encountered one another otherwise formed this band. Church parking, fucker. The band members' names were Utah Crabathor, French Tickler, Cue Ball Jones, Scalloped Potatoes, Nestor Shylock, Gutter Repairman, and giant episode of the television show Columbo. Church parking fucker. Their music was a fusion of jazz, funk, smooth jazz, alternative, karaoke, Cajun music, with a twist of alternative. Apologies to Matt on the theft of that one. They started modestly by recording their own demos on a piece of dental floss, and then distributed it as a pack of chewing gum. But even these meager first efforts were so well received by music critics and dumbasses of other ilk that they quickly found themselves on the fast road, or in the fast lane, to big super duper stardom. They became way bigger than the Beatles, or the Frogs, or Flotsam and Jetsam, bigger than the Trippy Ding Dongs, or even the E Pluribus Unum Band. And, well, God damn it, pretty soon everybody in the whole universe wanted to own their entire musical output, which within about 4 years of the band's existence had reached 38,000 songs. Most of them sounded exactly the same as one another, but that never stopped anybody from loving each and every one individually. In fact, the bass player wrote only one bass line that he played in absolutely every song. But somehow, the music was so infectious that people couldn't get enough, no matter how repetitive and stupid the shit was. And the band toured effortlessly throughout the universe. Before Hamburger propulsion technologies, it was very tedious, and to travel from one planet to the next, it usually died before you got there anyway, because there was such distance. But now with Hamburger propulsion, it was simple, and they could get to their destination planet rapidly. So the band toured every inhabited planet in just a 3-month tour, which meant that they were playing as many as 347 shows a day. Shows lasted about 25 seconds, which really didn't matter all that much, because as I said earlier, everything was pretty much the same shit over and over again. So they'd show up for like 25 seconds and play the riff, just hit a pedal, a repeat pedal, on the stage or whatever. Start repeating, they'd walk out. Nobody even noticed that they weren't there anymore, because they were 7 really nondescript people. It's the kind of people that, you'd if you've ever been somewhere and there's a half dozen people in the room, there's always one of those people that you just don't even notice, and so you might come away from that situation thinking, well, there were 5 people in that place where I was just now. Well, with a crowded concert venue, even though they were center stage and the focus of attention, since they were all so plain and banal and bland and so forth, nobody would even notice. There were still thousands of people in the concert venue, and it was hard to tell that 7 of them had left. So this is how they accomplished the tour of the entire universe in a mere 3 months. Advertisers saw their opportunity in this band, with it being basically the favorite band of every single being in the universe. They realized that if they could start putting their ads into the band's songs, they'd become naturally insanely rich, richer than God, who made a really comfortable. God, by the way, is like E.E. Cummings, prefers its name to be spelled with a lowercase g. After all, it's not a proper name, it's a description. It's like baseball bat. There's lots of baseball bats out there. You don't capitalize that. There's a lot of gods too, so why capitalize? The one that just went by the name God, instead of having, a cool other name like Vishnu or Bob Dobbs or, whatever. The one that just went by that generic term realized it was a generic term, and so that's why lowercase g. Why didn't that God have a cooler name? Advertisers like Wal-Mart by this point owned a number of planets and basically ran all interplanet commerce throughout the universe. Sam Walton had been resurrected from the dead with some of the money that Wal-Mart had made. The numbers to describe the amount of money that Wal-Mart had made by producing inferior products and selling them for way too much money. The numbers were unknown to most people. Scientific notation was really the only way to properly express these numbers. Trillions, quadrillions, quintillions. It wasn't even close to what Wal-Mart now had. But too much was never enough, of course. So they started advertising through the band's songs. Even though there was almost no kind of business anywhere that they didn't already own. There were a couple of record stores here and there on a few planets, and I think like a burger joint or two that they didn't own, but pretty much everything else, all the universities, all the public schools, they were all Wal-Mart enterprises, and they were all for profit by this point in time. Hospitals were run by Wal-Mart. There's no kind of feeling of guilt by any of the band members, including Wal-Mart's messages in their songs. Of course, any kind of musical integrity had been removed during the 21st century. And now musicians were genetically predisposed to selling out in absolutely any way possible. If the promoters told them write a song about eating the ears off of a kitten, they'd damn well write that song. And in fact, that song had been written a number of times because for one reason or another, that was a special favorite topic of one of the large music producers in the industry. Concert venues these days, instead of like selling t-shirts and alcohol, sold tattoos of the bands and trepanations to expand your mind. And to be trepanned at one of their concerts was thought to be the best buzz available. So people who went to a lot of concerts had dozens, hundreds of little holes in their heads all over the place. Keep on getting them until their skulls collapsed. It wasn't too much of a problem. Artificial skulls were commonplace, made out of unicorn bone. The unicorn farms throughout the universe. Unicorns were like the easiest animal ever to raise. So There's never any problem with having enough artificial skulls to go around. Eventually, somebody started to wonder where the artificial skulls were coming from. For years, nobody even really questioned it because they were having too good a time at the concerts and getting the holes drilled in their head and get an artificial skull and get more holes drilled in that artificial skull. So they didn't give it much thought for a good long time. And finally, some sensitive soul found out that unicorn horns were being harvested to provide the artificial skulls. It didn't even kill the unicorns to harvest the horn, and they just grow a new one back anyway. But of course, the sensitive folks knew better and decided that it was cruel to the unicorns, even though unicorns totally. These folks took up the cause. So they took up the cause of the unicorn horns, saved the unicorn horns. Don't make them grow new horns because it's uncomfortable. Cutting off the unicorn horns was like giving a person a haircut or a toenail trim, but this group didn't want to hear it. Now Wal-Mart, which was naturally the biggest unicorn, was the only unicorn harvester in the world, or in the universe anyway, had kind of a rivalry with this group. And of course they had a huge rivalry. The group grew to include over 72 members, which was at that point in history the biggest opposition to Wal-Mart that had ever taken place. Wal-Mart's band of hitmen set out to eradicate the group, and they rubbed out pretty much all of them. But there were like 5 or 6 of them that lived way out in the country, and none of the hitmen really felt like going out into the country. So these 5 or 6 individuals just survived on producing newsletters and such to promote their cause. But only the other 4 or 5 people would read it, so it didn't amount to shit. All of these individuals were forgotten for a long time, but one of them still festered with his thoughts of rebellion. His interest in the unicorns had waned, but he invented new causes every so often to get fired up about and later forget, such as liberation of kumquat balls, extraterrestrial free-range chicken barf. This guy started making vomit bombs. A bomb, when it exploded, vomit would spray everywhere. It was slow, tedious work. Filling up the vomit bombs took him years and years. He grew very skinny from his bulimic habit, but it was all for the greater good. He planned to plant vomit bombs throughout the universe, inside Wal-Mart stores, and detonate them all at the same time, spraying vomit all over their precious inventory. Even though this was kind of an infantile sort of rebellion, considering the fact that they could just wipe the vomit off and sell the stuff anyway, this guy really had it in his mind that he was going to make the establishment pay for essentially putting everybody into a state of zombification. People were basically the alive dead at this point. Not a whole lot running through their brains. Not a lot of original thought. Not any kind of advancement in most cases. Since the invention of Hamburger propulsion, science had more or less shut down throughout the universe. A few rogue scientists continued to work, discover new things, write about their knowledge, but very few people were willing to participate. No one read their work. Nobody shared in their discoveries. Nobody was interested any longer. So I guess he was thinking that this would somehow wake people up. Whether he was right or not, nobody would ever know. Although there was no one really close to this man, thought implants picked up on all his evil plans. And, it took a while because so many people in the universe to monitor that the governing body didn't really notice for a good long while what was going on. And they were still probably in that sleep phase. So it took a real long time for him to be found out that he worked on his little project for a long, long time while still not being discovered. Eventually they did discover him and his gigantic stash of vomit bombs. And rather than arresting him, just as a good prank of their own, they detonated him, drowned him in his own vomit. In fact, there's so much of it, it made a good portion of his planet uninhabitable. Wal-Mart, being, of course, ever business savvy, sent a film crew along with the detonation team and filmed the whole thing. A day later, beta tapes. In the future, everybody goes back to beta tapes. Beta tapes of this vomit explosion appeared on Wal-Mart shelves throughout the universe, and it became the largest selling video in history overnight. So inadvertently, his actions had been of great benefit to Wal-Mart rather than destroying their enterprise, or at least hampering it a little tiny bit. The video became more than just entertainment. It became sort of emblematic of the entire human species. And I suppose the message there was, don't try anything funny or we'll nail you. That sort of message had been delivered many, many times, but and in much the same way through entertainment, or as under the guise of entertainment, I guess it would be. Media had been controlling people like that for forever.